Welcome, folks. This is the design forum. I have in the chat shared a link to an Etherpad where folks are welcome to jot notes. The goal of today's meeting is to talk about a proposal for a modular OpenMRS web framework. And we're lucky enough to have Joel Denning joining us to kind of walk us through that proposal. So I think given that we have about an hour before people are going to have to run, I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time. I think I'll just hand the mic over to you, Joel. I don't know if you want to know a little bit about the folks you're talking with, or I think maybe you know enough context. For your information, I'm screen recording, capturing this, so I'll get it posted to YouTube after the call.
Okay, great. Sounds good.
Maybe I could.
Hi, everyone.
Maybe let me give just a little bit of for folks that may not have it, a little bit of the kind of how we got here,
Sure. Yeah.
rather than putting that on you. So, as folks may know, we've been trying for a while to find a method or a strategy for growing more collaboration in the community around the front end. I won't go through the history, but folks that have been involved with OpenMRS may know that we all kind of share a backend platform, but a lot of distributions over the years have started to make their own front ends or have custom front ends. Distributions like Bomni have front end implementations like PIH or Ampath or Isaud, or a host of different organizations and countries are doing work sometimes in the reference application, sometimes in bespoke front ends where they're using Angular or React, and then we have distributions like Bomni as other examples of front ends. The world has kind of moved toward client-side front end technologies, and so with everybody kind of working in their own space, we're missing a lot of opportunity for collaboration. And there's a lot of times where organizations or countries are creating the same functionality in multiple places. Sometimes that's just going to happen, and that's just life, and that's fine. But there's more than there should be, I think, opportunities where folks could reuse or share some functionality. And because of the siloed front ends, we're missing out on those opportunities to collaborate. So we've been pushing on ways or trying to find ways, strategies to how can we start to converge or kind of bring things together. That conversation led us to kind of putting a stake in the ground and saying, hey, let's try to at least get a few organizations to commit toward kind of putting together a framework, or trying to envision or create some solution that direction, or at least experiment with a solution that direction. And that discussion also led to discussion of micro front end and the potential technologies. And I think JJ, in searching around that, discovered Single SPA, and the author of Single SPA is Joel Denning, and it led us to conversations with Joel and some excitement of how kind of newer approaches to modularity inside browsers might allow us to bring some of our work together, at least start to run some things side by side, and see a future where development, whether it be in Bomni or bespoke apps or the reference application, could kind of start to share a framework in the client browser. So this is kind of a proposal, or putting some stakes in the ground in terms of going that direction, and we're very lucky to have Joel joining us. And with that, Joel, I'll pass it on to you. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Burke. Yeah, so today I have sort of three different phases of the discussion that I want to go through. And the first phase is I just want to introduce myself a little bit to everyone and talk about like what I've been doing, what my role is or could be, and also what I'm hoping to be able to help with at OpenMRS. Second phase is I have like 15 slides. The slides, we'll dive into conversation with the slides, and there's a chance we won't get through them all. That's okay, but that will be the meat of it. And then at the end, I want to talk about like, what does this mean? Like next steps, what are we doing? How do we go forward? And so I will go ahead and share my screen here. Let's see. Okay. So is sharing. So first off, here's a picture of me in my GitHub profile. So I'm a nerd front-end software developer for the last just since like middle school. And I've worked at Amazon. I've worked at a place. I started a place called Canopy. I was one of the first few devs there. Worked at Simplify, and yeah, I just love front end stuff. I'm excited to try to help and get involved. One of the things I've been wanting to be aware of is that I don't know all of you, and that I'm new to this endeavor, and so I don't want to like step on any toes or come in saying things that are like excluding people who have been here from the very beginning in any processes. So I'd like to be collaborative, work with any and all of you, and at the end of this presentation, talk about how that can be possible and what we can do going forward to work together. But yeah, with that said, let's jump in. And while I'm talking, feel free to interrupt me. I don't know how these design talks usually go. I don't know how much discussion there is or isn't, but anyone feel free to jump in at any time. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to do is I want to demystify what is micro frontend, like once and for all, because the word micro frontend has been used in those threads on Talk, and if you go look it up on the internet, you'll find a lot of things. A lot of them are like heavy concepts, like big concepts, and it's hard to know like what does this actually mean. And so I'm going to show you I'm going to show you one app that I helped create that is a micro front-end architecture, and that will hopefully answer some of like just the basic, what are we even talking about with a new like front-end architecture with modules and stuff like that. So here's the app that I was referring to. This is Canopy, where I previously was employed. And I just opened up this panel right here. This is actually an internal only like developer tool that we built for ourselves while we worked there. And you'll notice that there's a list on the left-hand side here of all of the micro front ends that exist. And you'll notice some of them, so some of them are more like, so login UI is like going to be actual UI components, but then there will be ones like, there's one called auth. So here is the one called auth, CP client auth. There's another one, fetchers for fetching data from the backend, getting JSON data from the backend, the nav bar, and you'll see a lot of these. And what those micro front ends actually are is, I'll click this toggle app overlays button, and this is stuff, I posted a video a couple days ago that showed some of this already, so if you've seen that, this will be a review. But yeah, so when I toggled the overlays, you'll see that there are now words overlaid on top of the micro front ends, and you can see which one is which. And so at the top, we have primary navbar. And then the rest of it is a thing called contacts UI. And so we've split the screen where one part of the screen is a completely different micro frontend or app than the other part of the screen. And what's cool about these is that they can actually be implemented in completely different frameworks. So, you know, the popular frameworks right now in front end are React, Angular, Vue. You could have a navbar implemented in Vue and a contact list that is implemented in React or Angular, and they can coexist. So that's one cool thing, is that there's you can have multiple frameworks. You don't have to choose one. The other cool thing, though, is that each one of these micro frontends can be owned by a completely different Git repository and a completely different organization or team, even. And so that's what the parenthetical words are. White Squad. That was the name of the team that is in charge of developing that portion of the UI. And so in OpenMRS terms, I mean, we've got all of the distributions, we've got all the different developers and groups. The main thing with micro frontends is that you will be able to write your own micro frontend and plug it into the rest of the app. So you write your own, you plug it in, and you can pick maybe functionality you want from the core modules, or you can maybe even pick and choose functionality between other modules that just exist out on GitHub, and then implement your own modules. The way that this works, is that the URL, the client-side URL in the browser, determines which micro frontends are active. And so the navbar is always active unless you're on the login page. And then contacts UI is going to be active if the URL starts with /clients. You'll notice as we navigate to billing, we've actually got 3 going on here. That's because they're in the middle of migrating off of this workflow UI 1 to billing UI. But you'll notice that the URL changed. So now the billing part of that, the prefix in the URL, is like our top level, that's like our top level routing key thing. And so as we navigate around, we'll see engagements go here. Tasks. You'll notice the overlay is sort of messing up here. They're not all active, the ones that are overlaid on top of each other. They're not all active. That's actually just a bug in how it's being displayed. Right now, it's navbar and tasks UI are the 2 that are active. We've got transcripts calendar. We can show even a more complicated example. So here's where there are 4 separate ones that are active at the same time, each controlling a different part of the screen. This is sort of complicated. Normally, it's easier if you just have like maybe a navbar and then one other app. If you go too crazy, splitting it up too far, it can become complicated coordinating things between them. But this is just to show that it is possible. And we'll create an engagement here. We'll see another situation where we've got 4. Here are 4 micro frontends active, all different ones. You'll see White Squad, Emerald Squad are both involved in making this happen. And so, yeah, I wanted to just take a pause right there for a chance for anybody to jump in with comments or questions, because this is what we're talking about when we're talking about like micro frontends and that type of architecture. And maybe the group is too big for anybody to jump in with questions. I don't know. There are a lot of people.
Yeah. we have a fair number of people, but I think I would just, for folks in the OpenMRS space, think you know, Bomni or reference application or your custom application being perhaps the bulk of this, and the ability to switch over to a div that is effectively in the same single page app that is, a new module coming maybe from the community that doesn't necessarily um, have to be running
Yeah,
in Bomni or reference application um, or your custom application.
yeah, yeah. Thanks, Burke.
I've got a quick question. This is Tobin. Is it pretty easy for the various different sections of the screen to be communicating and working together with each other to sort of make it really seamless? Like,
Yeah,
for example, up on the screen, that end user form somehow needed to update that left panel, and then that update at the top. I mean, can they all work together seamlessly?
yes, this is a great question. This is actually the most common question. So like Burke mentioned, I authored and maintain an open source library that makes this possible. And there are about 5,000 developers a month who come through and ask, well, not all of them ask me questions, but they come through and look at it. And a lot of them ask me questions. This is the number one question, is can they communicate and how? And the answer is yes, you can communicate between the micro front ends or the applications. The details of how I'm not going to get into right now, but here's what I will give 3 different strategies, and all of them are viable. Some are better for some situations or not. But yeah, the answer is yes, they can communicate.
Thank you.
Hey, sorry, this is Darius. I'm going to ask a question that's very much out of order from perspective of this presentation, but I'm on the bus going to work, so I'm just going to have to ask now.
Yeah.
Apologies for that. And take this as like there's a question from someone who's like used to be very involved but is not anymore. So I'm curious. I looked at the GitHub repo with some pull requests and commentary, and I think my main question is kind of around where is the migration path story for people's existing applications? And it may be, so my takeaway is that this is being looked at a lot from the perspective of, well, how can we write the best possible new application from scratch? And it may be that people are committed to that at this point and ready to go down that route, in which case that's great. I'm curious, I'm hoping to see some sort of migration story for sort of how people can bring some of their existing code forward gets covered. And maybe as a specific question, I was going to ask any thoughts about having multiple, the current reference application and also I think the current Omni application sort of have this idea of the home screen is a home screen with a bunch of apps. You could also imagine the approach where each of those apps is its own grouping of these. I mean, you actually don't need a single SPA. You could have 5 or 6 SPAs. You could imagine like people start to build a new clinical SPA while still running alongside while still running alongside like an old registration app or something like that. And I wonder if you've been considering that. So sorry for this question being way out of order.
Yeah.
No, thanks.
Joel,
Yeah,
maybe I can help a little bit in terms of from the OpenMRS side. That we're very much thinking, Darius, about migration, not just can we create something new. And specifically, I think the model of here's one more reference application is the last thing we need. I think the way I see this is there's a potential of focusing on the migration strategy, and that being that one of my favorite aspects of the single spot approach, and I think in general, I think coming to microservices in terms of a design approach is that it's very lightweight in terms of the requirements on an app to participate is a few methods. It doesn't take you don't have to completely refactor your app to play well in this sandbox. That's under the presumption that there's not a whole bunch of communication going on in between apps or a lot of dependency between them, which I think up front in a migration strategy, that would be the goal. So what I'm picturing in this is that you're running Bomni, or you're running the reference application or your version of it. You're running your bespoke or your custom front end that you've got a lot of effort in and years you've put into building up, and now we say, oh well, let's start collaborating on a let's say a non-communicable disease, an NCD functionality, or something that an app that we'd like two different countries or three organizations to work on that they could share. How do we solve that, or how do we build that so that it can work in maybe three different front ends? This approach would be, saying, okay, well, at least as an initial migration strategy, if you take your front end, whether it be Bomni, the reference application, or your custom front end, and tweak it so it can play by, it can fit into this single spot framework, then we could, switch a div over when at the right time to show that new functionality. And that's what I'm picturing, is that a migration strategy is opening the door to allow what you've already got and what you're already invested in, and then say, can we start to break those up? And to the extent that we can take functionality, for example, from Bomni and harvest that or refactor it, or start to take Bomni and say there's functionality that we can start breaking it into pieces and have them independently be able to play in this framework. That's the direction I'm thinking. And then as going forward, as we can create more functionality, maybe a smart on fire app store kind of approach, where functionality can be added to the framework, that we can start to introduce shared and collaborative things within this framework, without necessarily having to tell everybody, oh, you got to switch to a whole new front end.
Yeah, thanks, Burke. I would just add one small thing, which is that you asked a really good question about why not have multiple SBAs, and I would say let's actually discuss that in the RFC GitHub repo. I think the rich conversation to be had there, and having multiple SBAs is a legitimate option. But I don't think that right now we'll be able to get into the full details, but I would like to discuss it with you.
This is Mark, so I would agree we can maybe not get into the weeds of that, but I do feel like the idea of just tweaking the reference app so it works in the single SPA context seems a little bit maybe wishful thinking. We can talk about it. We can talk about the weeds more in the RPC? What's it called?
RFC, request
RFC, sorry, too many acronyms.
Yeah. Yeah, so migrating server rendered pages like the reference application or legacy UI, I'm going to do that yet, but we're committed to trying to figure it out, and it is going to be hard. So, and I don't want to minimize that it will be hard. For client rendered stuff, so like Bomni or Ampath or anything client rendered, those ones there is a clear migration path. This is actually what I do every day, is migrate people's client rendered applications into a micro front end architecture. The server rendered stuff, we've got some options, but we've started early discussions. But if you want to be involved in that and stay tuned to it, we will be discussing it in that RFC GitHub repo. But yeah, you are right. It is not going to be trivial just to say oh yeah, these JSPs and GSPs now are fitting into this client rendered world in a seamless way. We're going to have to figure out something. It's going to be tricky. And a commitment to having a legitimate migration path is really important, because it's really easy to build something new and then no one uses it. And that's not what I want. I want us to figure out something that actually works for the existing code and for the existing distributions and for new stuff. And so we're gonna try for it.
Sounds great.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
Bill.
I'll try joining the GitHub conversation. I'm gonna drop now, but thanks.
Okay,
Thanks, Serious.
thanks. I'm gonna jump into the slides here before before we dive into any more topics. I want to get a couple of the core concepts out of the way. And during these slides, there are about 15 slides. We might not get through all of them, but I want to get through more than 2 of them. I want to get through at least a few of them. So I might breeze through a few of the slides, and if there are, and feel free to ask some questions, but I might say like, hey, we might have to talk about this afterwards. But I would like to show you guys how does this, like, what are the pieces involved in making this work.
Yeah, I would say folks that are
Sorry.
joined by computer instead of phone, if you look in the chat along the right in Uber Conference, up at the top, there's a link to a notes page. So feel free to maybe scratch in if you have questions as Joel's going along, throw your questions into that Etherpad, and that might prevent us from derailing too many times.
Yeah. Okay. So so the slides, pulled open the slides, and the purpose of these slides, like what we're trying to accomplish by going over these, is trying to explain what is the architecture that we're proposing and what are the pieces of that architecture that make it possible. These slides actually mirror exactly what has been happening in that GitHub repo that we have been mentioning, the OpenMRS RFC Frontend. So in that GitHub repo, we're having discussions about each one of these slides in depth. And so that's where you can jump in and like to understand more and to try to comment, participate. But the slides here will just be a way for us to do a quick overview of what we're talking about. And the first big concept that we are talking about is switching to a single page application. And this is probably the largest shift of all of the slides. This is the largest shift to OpenMRS. OpenMRS, there are some distributions that already are doing a single page application, but the reference implementation and the legacy UI are not. They're doing GSPs and JSPs. And so this is a big shift from GSPs, JSPs, which are server rendered, to single page application, which is client rendered. And the pathway of how do we get from server rendered to client rendered is one of the biggest open questions. I've done it before, and I do have a couple options, but it can be tricky. And so, that's a big thing. And what we're talking about with the single page application is that the page does not reload when the user navigates. So this is like the Gmail application, the first big applications that was a single page application. When you compose an email, when you switch between the tabs, when you go to the sent email, the inbox, it's not actually going back to the server to get more HTML. It's actually the JavaScript in the browser is controlling what is shown to the user without having to go back to the server to ask for more HTML. And so there's no reloading of the page as you navigate. And that's the big difference. The reasons to do it is because this is the industry standard for building large web apps. If you're going to build like a complex and dynamic user experience in a browser, single page application is the industry standard. Devs, better for users as well. And why it could be better for users is that you don't have to reload the page, and so once you load up the web app, you don't have to reload it ever, and so it can be zippy, fast, which is cool. But yeah, this is the biggest one, is switching to a single page application. There. The next part of this is modules. So modules are, as of 2015, baked into the JavaScript programming language. They are part of JavaScript now. And it's crazy that it took us until 2015 to get there, because JavaScript has existed since the 90s. But we now do have modules in JavaScript. And there are two types of modules in JavaScript. There are build time modules and in-browser modules. And if you want to, like, I'm not going to go too far into the details. This is described in the RFC repo. But an in-browser module is one where you make a network request to download JavaScript code that is a JavaScript module. And that is going to be, that's the proposed, like, core concept for how we add functionality to the OpenMRS frontend, is that you just add a module. And so, you know, right now OpenMRS has the concept of backend modules with the jars. This is the same concept except on the front end, is you can add your own module into the front end code. And we're going to be doing it with in-browser JavaScript modules. The next one is import maps. So import are a way of determining which URL to download a JavaScript module from. Let me just show you what an import map looks like. That might be the easiest way to see what it is. Here's an import map. So this is the import map for the same application that I was showing you earlier. And you can see we have a module called Canopy URLs. And here's the actual URL to download it from. We have a nav bar. Here's the URL for the nav bar. The auth, it's right here. Here's the URL for auth. And so import map just controls what are the modules available and where do I download them from. It's a browser specification. Chrome has it implemented behind a feature flag, so users can't use it quite yet, but it's getting close. And then other browsers are working on it. And so with these three concepts, these are the three biggest concepts to understand about, like, what we're proposing. It's a single page application with in-browser modules that use import maps to control where you download them from. Yeah, I'm not used to giving presentations where I just talk and talk and talk, but without, like, leaving a chance for questions. But I do want to get through a few more of these slides, and so maybe
it's fine.
Maybe
Joel.
I'll open
You're
it up
doing a great
to
job.
questions at the end.
Yeah, you're doing a great job, Joel. Don't keep on going. You're speaking to also more people than are on this call, so I think getting through these is good.
Sounds good. Okay, so next one, we've got bundling. So bundling is the process of combining multiple files into one JavaScript file. And so when you're writing code, you want to have maybe dozens or hundreds of files to organize your code. But when you're actually executing it in the browser, you don't want to have dozens or hundreds of network requests to download each of those JavaScript files individually. And so bundling is the process that allows you to have dozens or hundreds locally while developing, but they get combined into one of them, into one JavaScript file when you're doing it, when you're running it in the browser. So all major frameworks and almost all front-end code gets bundled now. WebPack is that's the big name in the bundling space. The proposal here would be you can actually choose your own bundler. You can use WebPack or anything else, but you do need to bundle your code to be a JavaScript module. So you need to turn your 15 files into one file, and then that one file is a module. That's how it fits into the OpenMRS proposed architecture here. Dependency management is the next one. So there's the front end world uses NPM, it uses Node, it uses Yarn, it uses Node modules. Those are all like relatively new things, like last 10 years type of new things. And the idea here is like you can choose however you want to manage your dependencies. The most common one is NPM, and Yarn is another one. But there won't, like, this will be completely up to the people implementing modules how they want to do the build time dependency management. Common dependencies represents like, okay, so if we're gonna have, like, let's say that we have some Angular code, we have some Vue code, and we've got lots of different micro frontends, maybe 3 Angular micro frontends, 4 Vue frontends, or something like that. Do you really want to have 4 versions of Angular, or 5 versions of React, or 3 versions of Vue? The answer is probably no from a performance perspective. You don't want to download the same framework twice. And so common dependencies accomplishes that by having one version of that framework that you're using. This can be done very easily with React and Vue. With Angular, it's a little bit trickier, but still possible. Where you have one, you have one version, and then anybody who needs React or Vue can get it from the common dependencies in the browser. So they omit the common dependency from their bundle. So it's not in the bundle, and so then the browser has to give it to it. And that's, so that's what a common dependency is. Compilation refers to turning JavaScript code into other JavaScript code. That's what, JavaScript is not a compiled programming language. And so compilation of JavaScript is sort of a funny thing to think about. You don't have to compile it. But so why are we compiling it? And the idea here is that, so every major framework, it pushes people down the path of a script, with the purpose being that you can make optimizations during compile time, and also make sure that you support older browsers at compile time. And so the proposal here is that everyone can use whichever JavaScript compiler they want, Babel, TypeScript. If you wanted to do PureScript, Elm, other fancy ones, there's no, like, you could use whatever you want. The most popular by far is Babel. So compilation is up to the implementer, how they do it. A build process. So build process would be compilation and bundling. You throw in maybe testing and linting as well. And the build process is largely just doing the bundling. It's turning 20 JavaScript files into one JavaScript file. That's what the biggest part of the build process for JavaScript. And the idea here is that once again, and I think maybe even taking a step back here, what I'm trying to express with these slides is like, what do you have to do in order to architecture, and what is completely up to your choice? Because there are going to be some things that you just sort of have to do in order to fit in to the system. But then there are going to be a lot of things that you don't. And I'm actually a big fan of freeing up the distribution authors and implementers as much as possible, such that there's not like a whole bunch of stuff that you don't have a million hoops to jump through in order to get your code working within the system. And so a lot of these slides are just showing like, hey, compilation, you get to do it however you want, or don't do it if you don't want to. Bundling, do it however you want. Build process, do it however you want. And so, yeah, with the build process, you can do it however you want. You can do it however you want. Authentication and authorization. This is something where perhaps like an OpenMRS core module could help with authentication and authorization, meaning making network requests to the backend and verifying that you're logged in, verifying that you can do things. That's something that might be best centralized, although, still sort of early on figuring out exactly what that would look like. Routing, another one that is, so routing is another one where it's up to the implementer of the distribution how they want to do routing within their micro frontend. So if you're using Angular, you can use Angular Router. If you're using React, you can use React Router. If you're using Vue, you can use Vue Router. And if you're using something else, feel free to use whatever that else router is too. The way that you can have multiple routers from different frameworks on the page at the same time is you do have to have a top level router. And a top level router is what I was showing earlier, where we were navigating between billing and engagements and tasks, and that was switching out which micro frontend was available. That top level router is just controlling which micro frontend is active. But within that micro frontend, they can do their own routing. And so you'll see that, like here's a maybe clear example, is that the URL will change as I click on these different forms, but the same micro frontends are handling these routes. And so, yeah, that's sort of the routing overview, is that as a top level router, the proposal is to use single SPA. That's what single SPA is it just controls which micro frontend is active for any particular URL. But then within the micro frontends, they can use their own router, whichever one they want. Okay, we've got 3 more. I'm breezing through some of these in a way that might be like, it might be hard to follow all of the little details I'm going into here, but hopefully I'm giving enough of just an overview. Single SPA application. So a single SPA application is a module. That's the main thing I want to call out here. So we talked about modules earlier. A single SPA application is a module, but it's a special type. It's one that controls specific routes. And so like an authentication module would not be in charge of any routes. So it would be a module, but not a single SPA application. However, let's say we have like an admin UI or a login UI. Those would be modules that are single SPA applications because they control specific routes. And so, yeah, like modules is the core concept here. Some of them are going to be single SPA applications, some of them are not. And an example, single SPA application is another term for micro frontend. So I'm using those two terms interchangeably. So primary navbar in this example is a single SPA application and a micro frontend. Those are the same thing. Contact menu is a single SPA application and micro frontend. So are the other two. And so Ampath's Angular front end, or Bomni's Angular JS front end, or any other distribution could become a single SPA application. So that is the migration path for client rendered applications. Is you can take existing applications that are written in any framework and a single SPA application by wrapping them in a couple methods. And that's what I mean by there's a pretty good migration path for client rendered stuff. Server rendered stuff, like I mentioned, it's a little bit trickier. We'll have to figure out. But for client rendered stuff, the migration is take your existing code and turn it into a micro front end or a single SPA application. And so you can think of this is what gives structure. The single SPA application is what gives structure to our modules. Our modules are just JavaScript code. The single SPA applications are actually structured enough to control pieces of the UI. We can split up the page by structuring them with single SPA applications. And last two slides here real quick. UI frameworks, we've already talked about this one. The idea is that we won't dictate which framework you have to use. You can use, if you already have a large Angular code base, stick with it, keep the existing stuff, continue using it. And then, or if you have a React one or Vue one, same. And then if you want to, for new code, you have the choice of which one do I want to use, and then you can use it. This is important since we're so distributed, and there's so many different developers and code bases. If we just said everyone's doing React, that would be such a large redo to yeah, that'd be such a large redo and so costly, and maybe would never even happen. And so the idea here is we're going to stay flexible to UI frameworks. And if a new UI framework comes up free, we would be able to let that one join in on the fun, the architecture, without having to redo everything else. So this is, I view this as like rewrite prevention right here, is allow all single SPA applications to choose whichever framework they want. And that's something that will hopefully provide a lot of value for OpenMRS. Style guide is another one. The style guide is so CSS classes, JavaScript components that are sort of at the basis of this UI. And there are a lot of questions about what this style guide exactly will or won't be. But the idea is that when we have very core common CSS stuff or JavaScript components, maybe like the very small basic JavaScript components, maybe some of those could also be shared between distributions. Not quite sure. We'll have to get into the details to see what would or would not be feasible. But the style guide will provide whatever should be consistent from a user experience perspective would be in the style guide to help that happen. Okay, that's it. I just went through all the slides really quickly. Lots of details there. Went into some of the weeds. But let's take a pause. Let's take a pause right there and yeah, let's do some questions.
Yeah. So, Joel, if you want to go back to the Uber conference screen, and I'll repost the link. So if you can go, I just posted a link to an Etherpad. There's a set of questions there. Maybe we could try to run us through as many of those as we can. And
Great. Okay. So many OpenMRS users are on inexpensive, low processing power hardware. How can you mitigate the performance difficulties introduced by client-side rendering? I think we'll need to be careful not to let the diversity of frameworks exacerbate this. Yeah, so performance, very good thing to be calling out. If you think about it, this is the same amount of work that has to be done on their computer or their server. Whether it's done on the server side or the client side, it's about the same amount of work. And then in terms of like diversity of frameworks and how that could impact performance, so frameworks run you about 300 or 400 kilobytes of ungzipped JavaScript code and about 80 to 100 kilobytes of gzipped. So it's not abusing the network like crazy to have one instance through the common dependencies of those. And then additionally, like the JavaScript execution of those frameworks, I guess performance is a complex topic, but maybe I'll hand wave a little bit here and say I have done extensive research and have built this many, many times, and this isn't going to be less performant than other ways. Yeah, in fact, often it can actually improve performance in some ways too. But, yeah, so it's a good question. It's a good question. Next one is.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? Burke, do we have to get off this conference room like promptly at
the top of the hour?
Top of the hour?
It's really it's up to Joel's availability, and I'm sure other folks will have schedules. But we could go a little over as long as Joel can.
Okay.
Yeah. So a major performance challenge of OpenMRS is that there are many AJAX requests which are not bundled together and are sometimes redundant. It seems like we'd want to build a front-end data management layer, e.g. in Redux, which all components and apps would request data from. Is this kind of architecture possible with single SPA? So yes, it's possible. It also makes me nervous though, to have like a bottlenecky type of thing. What I mean by bottlenecky is if you've got 15 micro front ends and all of them are sharing a Redux store, you can break things pretty quickly if the actions in the store and the state changes. And so, yeah, we want to not have like just way too many network requests, but also we don't want to have a single part of the code base that controls everything and could break anything. And so, yeah, I think that having a global Redux store would be too opinionated, too much. Like it would tie down the micro front ends too much to a specific thing. However, I do agree, and there are different ways to accomplish this, that we should not make too many AJAX requests.
Cool, and thanks. And perhaps we can talk about some of the other approaches to making fewer AJAX requests at a later date or on another thread.
Yeah. Let's do it. I'm using the RFC GitHub repo as my that's what I'm hoping we can use for our collaboration. So yeah, let's talk there, or you can Slack, OpenMRS talk, any of those. Let's talk.
Nice, thanks.
Okay, next one from JJ. Do in-browser modules work in a low connectivity setting? Is there a way to trigger fetching of all the in-browser modules on an initial load? So you can have the in-browser modules actually be self-hosted. So that's one way to is all of the in-browser modules are actually internal to, like they're hosted on the on-premise server. That's one way of solving this. Another way of solving it is, yeah, you can preload. You can preload all of the modules up front if that helps. But yeah, for connectivity situations, self-hosting solves everything if that's needed. And if we're not wanting to do self-hosting, then yeah, I mean, it's going to be the same as it is now. Going back to the server for more HTML every time you render a new page is going to be the same thing as downloading some JavaScript to do that. Does that make sense, JJ? Or did JJ have to go?
Yeah,
Yes. No. I'm just come off mute. I think in our model we just have a server that many sites call into, and so there is no on-premise server for 90% of the users. But those solutions, the latter solution would work for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. Like the way that it's working with JSPs and GSPs, it will work the same. It'll work the same with this. We're just swapping out HTML files for JavaScript files. Okay, the next one is SystemJS versus WebPack. So SystemJS is in browser, WebPack is not. That is a difference. SystemJS is a module loader, WebPack is a bundler. Those are different. So they both are dealing with modules, and that's how it can be easy to get them confused. But the thing to think is just SystemJS is in the browser. It handles the in-browser modules. WebPack is run in Node on the server, like during build time, and that is build time modules. So that's the main difference. SystemJS will be the glue that helps us have in-browser modules that cooperate. WebPack is something that will just be within one particular project. So each project will have WebPack, but there's only one SystemJS in the browser that's controlling how they interact. Does that clarify some things? Whoever asked that.
Yeah, that does. I mean, another approach could be like, maybe use Webpack plus require.js.
Yeah, so require.js is a competitor to SystemJS. Require.js is a module loader. My proposal is to use SystemJS, but require.js is an alternative option. Both of them do in-browser modules.
This thing, because a whole lot of stuff, our stuff on the Bummy, especially uses Webpacks and other things already in terms of, and we've been experimenting with a little bit in terms of require.js. But yeah, we can take this up later.
Yeah, I think the balance will be, Webpack within a particular module or, one piece in its build process makes total sense. I think the challenges or where we're looking for the benefit is can we get functionality from different projects, different groups running together where it doesn't necessarily require either a coordinated build between those groups or or the person who wants to implement it to have to create their own kind of coordinated build.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, next question is, would you choose something like Mosaic? I actually don't know what Mosaic is, so whoever asked that question, could you help explain it?
So yeah, so Mosaic is, you can say this is like like a front end or like a framework to build all these micro front ends. They have the common components as such. This is out or open source by Zolando quite some time back. So I was wondering, whether does it make sense for us to glue everything together without, or do you want to going to start with some sort of a broader level, like say framework, and maybe whether you would say something like some Mosaic. So it's essentially basically a set of services, libraries together, with some sort of a standardization or specifications in terms of how the components would interact, so some ways it's opinionated, but it gives you a starting point as such.
Yeah, so I'll have to look into this more in order to give a more educated sentence about it. But I guess my first question about Mosaic would be, is it a framework on its own? So if you use Mosaic, can you not use Angular? If you use Mosaic, can you not use React? Is my first question.
No, I think you can still use that. So just the top level one, right? You can say, which essentially is loading up everything. And after this, obviously you can load up your specific app using any technology that you want.
Yeah, so I'll do some research. I'll do some research into this because I am unaware of it. And then yeah, let's talk about it. Sounds interesting. Next question was challenges that you foresee, e.g., complexity, resource sharing, sandbox, loading, unloading. Yeah, good questions. So I've done this before with several companies, and this is the first time though that I'm trying to help out with a group like this. So OpenMRS is different than any other organization that I've been involved in, just in terms of, so it's a nonprofit, but also just it's not just OpenMRS, it's all of the distributions and all of the participation from the really large community. And so for me, the challenges that I foresee is well, how do we cater to the needs of all of this, everyone? Or how do we get everyone to the table? That's one of the trickiest things is who do I work with? How do we get this going? Who's how do we make progress? And so for me, I think a lot of the challenges are more organizational than technical. To address a couple of the technical questions that you have listed there. So resource sharing. So micro frontends do share a JavaScript runtime. They do share memory. They do share the DOM. And that's fine. Don't touch each other's DOM is a good rule. Like one micro frontend will create some UI, the other micro frontend will create other UI. Don't touch each other's UI. Let them control their own UI. Yeah, that type of resource sharing is totally fine. Sandbox. So the sandbox here is if you have a naughty developer who to reach into a different micro frontend's code, this will not prevent the naughty developer or bad actor from doing that. However, the idea is let's just not do that, and let's make it hard to do that and make it easy to do the right thing. It's if you wanted to go down the realm of iframes and stuff, but that gets pretty bad for performance and bad for a couple other reasons too. So it's not a perfect sandbox, and you do share resources. For loading and unloading, I would need some clarification there, I guess, as to what the question is.
I think is that
so it's
mounting
as
and
soon as
unmounting?
yeah. So as soon as, like, say, imagine a particular, like, sub app is, like, or goes out of the context, for example, unload that.
Yeah. So loading and unloading in Frontend usually refers to downloading code and then unloading what you downloaded. If we're talking for mounting and unmounting, so there's both loading and unloading, and there's also mounting and unmounting. And I think we might just be talking about all of those as the same thing. Is that fair? Or
Yeah.
what's
Yeah, I'm just, yeah. So part of the loading and unloading, like you can say, like, yeah, just like in terms of whatever he used, either required just
yeah. So for downloading the
loading that.
code, for downloading
was
the code,
talking about more about mounting and, like, say,
okay. Yeah, so for that one, for mounting and unmounting is the entire micro front end can be mounted and the entire micro front end can be unmounted. And then within the micro front end, you're mounting and unmounting individual components as well. For mounting and unmounting the entire micro front end, that's where single SPA would help. So that's what single SPA is doing. And then for mounting components within that micro front end, that's up to the individual framework. Yeah, I'm not sure if I got totally to your question there.
yeah, I'm also facing like a little bit of, like, lag into this thing, so it is not helping. But a few comments on this, like, if you can hear me. I think I totally like a collaboration, and here at ThoughtWorks, we have been applying this techniques with a very distributed teams spread all over, and we have faced some, like, serious collaboration changes. We don't know where things are happening, common things being done. For example, most of it is in terms of how you organize. So that's a thing, and especially in open source, if you want to say, like, I want to an app that should work with any sort of an open is a key thing. The other aspect is in terms of the security and in terms of the sandbox. So like, important, especially like we're in the health domain in terms of how you do this. So one of the aspect was, like, we tried, there are various things, like, have been tried. Another aspect was, like, to figure out dynamically, is an app or sub app or, like, a micro front end, is it accessing, like, for example, like, something that it should not. All right. And uh, in terms of the either the code checks first up in terms of saying what it is doing, or in terms of, like, some even have used dynamically in terms of investigating and reporting it, that so that it may be also something that we need to think about. But
yeah,
I mean, yeah.
it's a good question. So security is a interesting, and large, expansive topic. If the backend gives you the data, then that's really what matters. What I mean is that the backend needs to be responsible for the vast majority of permissioning and security. The front end needs to make sure that cross-site scripting is not possible and some of the other security concerns on the front end. But if the backend gives you the data, then that is the backend saying you are allowed to get the data. And so I normally haven't seen a need to say, this micro front end cannot get this data, this micro front end can get this data. If we needed to do that, we could explore it. But generally speaking, permissioning and, like, enforcing permissions and security is something that largely the backend has to help you with.
Well, it's not just in terms of the data access, right? Like, you're operating within a particular user context, and assuming, like, one app can make some, like, request you can say other part of the app can do as well. Like, it will be probably be the, if you have the microservices that will handle that.
I think
On the web
I
front
think
itself,
from where we are right now, we would probably make the presumption that if there's not on the fly, upload any module you want, but rather the implementation is delivering. Here's the modules we're gonna deliver to you, and I think right now we would make the assumption that any modules and implementation or distribution is going to include have been vetted as far as security goes, and that we don't have to worry about making a system that can take a module from anywhere and guarantee that it can't do something wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, like allowing arbitrary JavaScript to run inside of your code is scary. And so you want to make sure that you only let the right JavaScript run. That's, yeah. Does that, like, I'm not sure if we've really gotten to the bottom of your question. We might have to take it outside of this call, I'm not sure. But does that address some of your topics? Maybe, okay. That the lag might be getting us here, not sure.
Yeah, I think since we're over by a bit, why don't we try to move forward and we can kind of take some of the deeper dives offline.
Okay. So nesting of micro frontends levels and integration between nesting of micro frontends. So
wait, can I interrupt for 1 second, Joel?
Yeah.
I don't know if it was our hope to kind of discuss a little bit of the RFC process on this call, or would we do it on another time? But in any event, for those who are even thinking about dropping off momentarily, it is important that we kind of have some time, and maybe this is not the right call, to kind of figure out next steps as well. So I'm just throwing that out there that, I don't know how to resolve it at this moment, but that is a hope that at least I have, that we can figure out kind of, what are we going to do next?
Okay. Yeah, what do you think, Burke?
Yeah, I think it's probably, you could maybe type in some answers to these after the call, the rest of these questions, and maybe we could just get to that point real quick. Since we're already about 15 minutes over, maybe we can just take 5 minutes and talk about next steps.
Okay. So I'll tell you my where I currently am, and would also like to hear from you, Burke, JJ, and anyone else. I'd like to work with a few devs from each group, like, or at least one dev from each group, to go over these things in more detail and talk about what it would mean in the future, and then even begin work on it. But I'd like to hear your thoughts, Burke, JJ, anyone else?
Yeah. So I think I've been pushing for, and rather than, while we do want to have a transparent and an open process, and we want to welcome any help from folks, I also am mindful of, we want to dip our toes and actually take some action in this area that is pragmatic, has some near-term usefulness for implementations, and so we're not in an ivory tower. And to that end, we're kind of prioritizing some organizations that are willing to kind of step up and devote some developer cycles to working with you, as being the drivers. So trying to strike this balance between allowing everyone to be heard and to have input, but prioritizing those folks that are have skin in the game and are investing some time to kind of hammer through. And so I think the RFC process is a great way for us to kind of push this forward, make sure that the conversations that are happening, say within that group, are happening using the RFC process, and not often like side conversations. So I think this is one where let's say we get some developers, we've already got commitments from some organizations to have developers work with you. So I think, while you want to have some high bandwidth conversations, I think trying to push through the decisions and some of the thought process through the community forums, OpenMRS Talk, and the RFC process, to make sure they're not all happening on the side, will be helpful in terms of transparency and allowing people to follow what's going on. But we do want to try to kind of my expectation or my hope is that in the next week, few weeks to come, we can actually start making some calls and putting together some initial prototypes of what this could look like, and then with the goal being that somewhere within the next month or so we could have a hackathon, a community hackathon, and so in the hackathon, we would actually try to bring a couple, or exercise a couple of those prototypes. I would love to see a world where, we take a couple of the big things like implementations, Angular, React front end, or take Bomni and maybe take the reference application with whatever we think is the best workaround and say, can we squeeze these things into, a single SPA front end? I think there's been some good questions. I think one of the things that we need to be mindful of is it single SPA or is it some other framework? I think your familiarity, your authorship of single SPA definitely leans us that direction. And the truth be told, I think in the near term, my interest is, can we demonstrate the utility of leveraging micro front ends, and it's less about the specific, framework. I think one of the big pluses of your approach with single SPA is that it's very lightweight, kind of hands off. And I think the level to where we can only create the minimum dependencies between modules is going to benefit us. So from my perspective, next steps are we've already got some commitment of developers. I think over the next week, starting to get you names and contacts of folks, and then I think maybe leveraging some of these design calls as well as the RFC process to make sure you have clear kind of marching orders in terms of say getting to a hackathon and getting to a kind of that initial prototype. And the last thing I'll say is that I think what that prototype, what we're doing in that first pass, we need to make sure that those organizations that are committing toward this have a strong say in that. So I think having another meeting here soon to do what I think JJ's pushing toward is like, let's coordinate activities and make sure that we're working towards something that is actually useful to these implementations.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Joel, can you comment on, you've been posting these RFC pull requests. Essentially there's 13 slides that you are going to make pull requests for, perhaps more. How do you see the RFC process aligning with actually getting started?
Yeah, so they can go simultaneously. And the RFC process is about discussion and collaboration and decision making. And then implementation can happen before that's finished, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay, so essentially, at any point starting now, it would be I mean, just to add one sentence to Burke, what I'm hoping is that those of you who are on this call and within the community are interested will voice that interest and voice a real a concrete commitment, at least in these beginning stages, to participate in whatever this thing ends up being. And then that group will come together as soon as possible. So as Burke said, as soon as we can get these people on a call, I would say, meaning like days to weeks. And then that group, as well as representatives from their organizations, if necessary, will be the ones who help guide kind of what it is that we start on building, with Joel taking the leadership role on this. So.
Yeah, I would love that. What you were talking about, JJ, and what Burke was saying, like getting some commitment from some devs to collaborate on this. And there's a lot of decisions still to be made. There's a lot of code to be written. There's a lot of fun to be had. But yeah, like getting coming days and weeks so that we can start working on it.
Just to add on to that, I think it's great to get a plan for the prototype and the hackathon in place, as Burke suggests. I think that's a great kind of milestone to shoot for, as well as working through what this RFC process is, and I'd be really interested in seeing how that goes. This would be a great opportunity to simply document how everything's working up to the prototype. And then I think following the prototype, it would be great to have a follow-on discussion about where we go from there, how others who are interested in picking this up and contributing could happen, and how we organize those efforts following that, I think is something else that we need to work out. Can we make it, can we work out some other bite-sized chunks for people to pick up or not? But let's get to the prototype and see kind of maybe do a reflection, reflection on that process and how we got there and how well it worked.
Hey, I had a question for Joel. From your experience, it's Greg over in Kenya. How big of a project, how many hours, very roughly speaking, would it take to kind of set up a microservice environment where you could have single sign-on that could load each, Bomni or AMRS, and just be able to switch between the two and be able to exchange the patient's ID, for instance, so you could load the patient in both systems. But maybe Ref app is obviously, it sounds like probably a bit hard to put a perspective on, just given that it's server-side loaded. But is there a rough guesstimate on how many hundreds of hours we're thinking that kind of level of functionality? Partly because I'm thinking a little bit more down the road of, once we have this fundamental infrastructure in place, then we can start thinking a little bit more about the actual clinical application of adding in new clinical functionality, which doesn't exist in OpenMRS. And that kind of would be building a new application within the single SPA microservice front end, which could run in parallel with these other systems. But we can't even really start thinking about that new application until we have this first phase one up and functioning. And so I'm just trying to get a rough guesstimate.
Yeah, no, it's not hundreds of hours. Yeah, it's not hundreds of hours. And I guess it depends on what is included in the first phase and what isn't. But so I've done this with several groups before, and so starting from scratch, like if you're just completely starting from scratch, which we aren't, but if you're completely starting from scratch, you can get this going in like an hour and a half. Like you can get a lot of the core stuff. There's a little bit more work than that. So maybe I'd say like starting from scratch, it's like 5 to 10 hours. And then like adding in, so like getting Bomni or other distributions code working, that's often the hardest part. But that part is still not hundreds of hours. So yeah, maybe something like 20 hours or something like that of work as a guess. It's hard. It's hard to know how to guess. And it's for me, it's also hard because a lot of this is not the like technical implementation side. It's the what are we doing side that has the like, you know, like this will take some months to get like fully ready to go, but a lot of that will be making sure we get the right people, include the right people, and like get the right decisions, or get the conversations going so that we can make decisions. And so yeah, it's an organizational process as well, not just technical.
Yeah, that makes sense. Very cool, and it's great to have you involved, just given your extensive experience with kind of you know, front-end operations and deployment, which is something which we don't, I think, have as much skill sets available. So it would be great to be able to follow your lead on this.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, I think since we've
Yeah,
taken an hour call and turned it into a 90-minute call, I think just to put a stake in the ground in terms of kind of calling this call to an end. Jennifer, did you want to say something?
no, I think this is it's just going to take a lot of organization and a lot more conversations around this.
Yeah, agreed. I would say, you know, we have OpenMRS is committing, you know, at least OpenMRS Inc. is committing to this too, and that means Jen's leadership, Cynthia being able to help out. There's several of us that are, you know, volunteers in the community that are eager and hungry for this. I know, and talking to a bunch of organizations, there's a lot of interest in this. You know, can we find a way to converge and start working together? And so I think our commitment to you, Joel, is not just getting some devs to work with you, but also I see a path to where Greg and Jonathan Teich and their kind of visions of what they've been kind of drawing out as kind of what could be the future for OpenMRS. This also opens a door for that kind of development where we can say, if we can start running, you know, what is kind of existing code next to some newer code that doesn't all have to be within the same app. That door opening gives us a lot more options. I think combined with a strong style guide, there's a bright future of where we can go as a community. And so I think in the near term, I think our commitment to you is to help, you know, help drive through some of those organizational things, which is get decisions made, make sure people feel included, and there's some consensus on things, but also, as I mentioned before, not letting like a whole community consensus on every tiny point be a blocker for us. We need to get to, you know, either fail quickly or get to some, you know, initial prototype quickly, so we can see this feels like the right direction, or let's make some mistakes or learn things up front. I think both doing it and getting our hands dirty and having you help us lead us to that kind of prototype stage, while also people continue to ask questions and kind of research in this space and say, hey, what about this way, that way? I think the RFC and the discussions online will help us accomplish that. And I, you know, I think what we're going to need in the near term, in the next, you know, few days to week, is to have another call where we talk specifically about what are we doing, you know, like what is the next thing. And I have some biases toward that, but I'd like to make sure that the folks that are, you know, investing time into this are, you know, have their voices heard and are helping shape what that is. So I think in my mind, there's two immediate goals, and one is to get you connected to developers so you can start working on things, putting pieces together. We have some infrastructure where we can help host some things, and then work through the RFCs. And while we're doing that, I think then getting the group of organizations as well as others who are able to join to start, saying, hey, here's our goal. Here's what the next, I think I'm putting the hackathon as a stake in the ground, just to have a goal of, let's get to, I know we need to be thinking beyond that, but I'm saying in the near term, let's get clarity on what we're doing in the short term and how that's going to lead us, allow us to hack in the right direction. So I want to thank everybody for joining. Thank you, Joel, for helping lead the discussion and give us some great ideas. And I just look at the people involved and the people that have been on this call, and there's just so many bright, capable, talented people. It's hard for me to imagine a way that we can't do amazing things and save lives by writing code. So thanks everybody for joining. There's going to be more conversation going on in the near term. Online, follow the RFCs, follow Conversations on Talk. We'll make sure to broadcast ahead of time calls that are coming up, and I guess that's, hopefully we'll work our way to a modular front end for OpenMRS that is as inclusive and allows us to converge. So thanks folks for joining, and we will see you online, and between now and then we'll see you in cyberspace.